Emperor Glorbex the Magnificent adjusted his ceremonial crown, which looked suspiciously like a traffic cone covered in glitter, and leaned back in his throne with the smug satisfaction of someone who had just discovered fire and decided to burn down the entire galaxy with it. Broadcasting in 3, 2, 1, announced his Minister of Communications, Ziltron, whose voice cracked like a teenager asking someone to prom. The holographic cameras hummed to life across the Vorthak Empire's vast network, reaching approximately 14 billion viewers who were all secretly wondering why they were watching state-sanctioned murder instead of the galactic equivalent of cat videos. Citizens of the glorious Vorthak Empire, Glorbex bellowed, his voice echoing through golden halls that screamed compensating for something. Today we demonstrate what happens to those who dare oppose our righteous expansion. Behold a human terrorist who thought she could interfere with our divine mission. Maya Rodriguez stood on the execution platform, hands bound but chin raised, looking about as impressed with the proceedings as someone watching paint dry in zero gravity. Her crime? Helping evacuate a Vorthak mining colony's slave population. Her attitude? Completely and utterly unrepentant. Any last words, human scum? Sneered General Vextar, whose name sounded like a kitchen appliance having an existential crisis. Maya looked directly into the primary camera, smiled that particular human smile that made predators across the galaxy suddenly feel like prey, and said, "Yeah, you guys really should have done your homework." The crowd of Vorthak officials chuckled. Homework. What could this pathetic little bite possibly know that the mighty Vorthak Empire didn't? Execute her, Glorbex commanded with a theatrical wave. The energy beam fired. Maya Rodriguez, age 23, humanitarian worker and apparently someone with a very poor sense of timing, ceased to exist in a flash of light that was broadcast live to every corner of Vorthak space. The Emperor's throne room erupted in celebration. Champagne flutes clinked, scaled hands patted scaled backs, and everyone agreed this was exactly the kind of decisive action that would keep the lesser species in line. What they didn't notice, in all their self-congratulatory revelry, was the timestamp in the corner of the broadcast, 14:23:07 Galactic Standard Time. They would remember that number very, very soon. 8 years away, in a boring government building that looked like it had been designed by someone who thought excitement was a communicable disease. Admiral Jake Morrison watched the execution feed with the expression of a man calculating his taxes. "Well," he said, setting down his coffee mug with a soft clink, "that's unfortunate." Ambassador Priya Patel, sitting to his right, made a note on her tablet with the same energy most people reserved for grocery lists. Maya Rodriguez confirmed Kia at 14:23 GST. "Shall I file the incident report?" "Please do. Use Form 27B, the pink one." General Buck Thunderson, whose name was apparently not ironic despite his mild-mannered demeanor, cleared his throat. "Sir, the Vorthak just executed a human citizen on live television. Shouldn't we be, angry?" Admiral Morrison raised an eyebrow. "Oh, we are angry, Buck. We're very angry. Dr. Vasquez, how angry would you say we are?" Dr. Elena Vasquez, head of the Diplomatic Corps Psychological Warfare Division, consulted her tablet. "According to our proportional response protocol, I'd classify this as a Level 7 incident." "Level 7? Buck looked confused. "What's Level 7? "Complete systemic dismantlement of the offending party." Elena replied cheerfully, as if discussing weekend brunch plans. "And Level 8? "We don't talk about Level 8, Buck." Morrison stood up, straightening his perfectly ordinary uniform that somehow made him look more dangerous than any military regalia ever could. "Gentlemen, ladies, we have work to do. Priya, activate the Sunshine Protocol. Elena, wake up our sleeper assets. Buck, I need you to contact Admiral Chen in the Outer Rim. Tell her it's time for Operation Oops, did we do that?" "Sir," Buck ventured carefully, "the Vorthak have the largest military in known space. They control over 600 systems, but their fleet alone could." "Buck," Morrison interrupted gently, "how long have humans been in space?" "About 2 centuries, sir." "And how long have we been members of the galactic community?" 50 years. "Right. Now, here's a fun question. What do you think we were doing for those first 150 years? Buck's face went pale as the implications sank in. Oh. Oh no. Oh yes, Morrison smiled, and it was not a nice smile. The Vorthak are about to learn something very important about human nature. We're excellent at playing the long game, and we really don't like bullies. Across the galaxy, in hidden installations that didn't officially exist, sleeper agents who'd been posing as merchant traders, diplomats, and even janitors for decades received a simple message: the package has been delivered. Please proceed with unwrapping. The Vorthak Empire had exactly 46 minutes and 37 seconds left to exist. They just didn't know it yet. Back in the golden halls of the Vorthak capital, the victory party was in full swing. Emperor Glorbex was 3 drinks into what he called a celebration of justice and what everyone else called Tuesday. Intelligence officer Blixnorp, whose job was to know things before they became problems, had burst through the throne room doors with the urgency of someone who had just discovered their house was on fire. "Your Magnificence," he gasped, his scales turning an alarming shade of purple that usually meant either extreme stress or severe indigestion. "We have a problem." "Impossible," declared Minister of War Kraguth, whose military strategy apparently consisted of pointing at things and shouting until they went away. "We just executed a human terrorist. The humans are probably cowering in fear right now." "That's just it, sir." "They're not." Glorbex waved dismissively. "Of course they're not. Humans are too stupid to understand what just happened. They'll probably send us a strongly worded diplomatic note." "They did send us something, Your Magnificence." "See? I told you." "What did they say?" Blixnorp consulted his tablet with trembling claws. Quote, "Thank you for the notification. We have received your message and will respond accordingly. Please hold. Estimated wait time, 47 minutes. Thank you for choosing human customer service." End quote. The throne room fell silent except for the sound of Kraguth choking on his drink. "Customer service?" Glorbex's voice cracked. "They're treating this like a customer service complaint." "It gets worse, sir. We've lost contact with 17 outer rim colonies in the last 20 minutes. "Lost contact how?" "We don't know. The communications just stopped. No distress signals, no battle reports, nothing. They're just gone." Kraguth puffed out his chest, which made him look less intimidating and more like a particularly aggressive balloon. "Impossible. Our colonies are protected by the finest military installations in the galaxy. Each one has enough firepower to level a planet." "Had, sir." "Past tense. What do you mean, had?" Blixnorp's tablet chimed with an incoming message. His face went from purple to a sickly green. "Sir, I'm receiving a transmission from the Kepler mining station." "Put it through." The holographic display flickered to life, showing Commander Griselda of the Kepler station, looking about as calm as someone standing in a burning building. "Your Magnificence," she began, "I'm afraid I have some rather disturbing news. Our entire defense fleet just disappeared." "Disappeared?" "Ships don't just disappear, Commander. With respect, sir, these did. One moment our scanners showed 200 vessels in defensive formation. The next moment they showed empty space and a lot of glittering debris." "Oh, and sir?" "What?" "There's a human freighter requesting permission to dock. The captain says he's here to pick up anyone who wants to leave before the real unpleasantness begins." Glorbex stared at the transmission for a long moment. "How long ago did we execute the human?" Blixnorp checked his chronometer. 23 minutes, sir." "And we've lost how many colonies?" 43 and counting, Your Magnificence." For the first time in his reign, Emperor Glorbex the Magnificent began to suspect that maybe, just maybe, he had made a tiny miscalculation. The revelation began with a simple economic report that landed on Trade Minister Blorf's desk like a meteorite filled with bad news. "Your Magnificence," Blorf announced, his voice shaking harder than a paint mixer, "our economy just collapsed." "Collapsed? What do you mean collapsed?" "I mean ceased to function, sir. Every trade agreement we have with human corporations has been simultaneously voided. Our supply chains have been severed. Our banking systems are reporting massive fund transfers to something called Terra Holdings Incorporated, which apparently now owns 60% of our infrastructure. Glorbex felt something cold and unpleasant crawling up his spine. How is that possible? Dr. Elena Vasquez's voice crackled through the communication system, sounding cheerfully professional. Hello, Emperor Glorbex. Dr. Elena Vasquez, Terran Diplomatic Corps. I believe you have some questions. Human. What have you done? Oh, nothing too dramatic. We've simply activated some contingency plans. You see, Your Magnificence, when humans joined the galactic community 50 years ago, we weren't exactly the naive newcomers everyone assumed we were. We'd been preparing for this kind of interaction for quite some time. Intelligence Officer Blixnorp was frantically typing on his tablet. Sir, I'm reading reports of simultaneous uprisings on every world in our empire. Our garrison commanders are reporting that their own support staff, maintenance crews, and even janitors have turned out to be highly trained operatives. Janitors. Very well-armed janitors, sir. Dr. Vasquez continued in the same pleasant tone she might use to discuss the weather. The thing about humans, Your Magnificence, is that we're quite good at pattern recognition. When we joined the galactic community, we noticed a disturbing trend. Large empires tend to become bullies. Bullies tend to pick on smaller civilizations, and eventually they tend to pick on us. So you planned for this? Oh, we planned for everything. Operation Oops Did We Do That has been running for 47 years. Every human merchant, diplomat, aid worker, or tourist who entered your space was also a sleeper agent. Every trade agreement included very specific termination clauses. Every infrastructure project we helped build included some interesting design features. Kragoth sputtered. That's impossible. No one could coordinate something that complex. You're right. No one could. But everyone could. That's the beautiful thing about human civilization, General. We don't need a central authority to coordinate our response to existential threats. We just need to agree that something needs to be done. Blixnorp looked up from his tablet, his face now completely white. Sir, I'm receiving reports that our primary fleet has been neutralized. Neutralized how? According to this, they were offered the choice between surrender and total annihilation. Apparently, Admiral Morrison was very polite about it. Dr. Vasquez's voice took on a note of pride. Admiral Morrison is one of our finest diplomats. I believe his exact words were, "Gentlemen, you have 30 seconds to decide whether you'd like to continue existing." And they chose surrender. Unanimously, Your Magnificence. Even your most loyal commanders aren't stupid enough to fight a battle they can't win. The throne room's emergency alerts began screaming as another dozen star systems reported the same impossible pattern: complete infrastructure failure, simultaneous uprisings, and the sudden appearance of human merchant vessels that turned out to be the most advanced warships anyone had ever seen. Emperor Glorbex the Magnificent looked around his golden throne room and realized he was no longer the emperor of anything at all. At exactly 15:10:07 Galactic Standard Time, 47 minutes after Maya Rodriguez's execution, Admiral Jake Morrison materialized as a hologram in the Vorthak throne room, looking as casual as someone dropping by to borrow a cup of sugar. Emperor Glorbex, he said with a polite nod, I believe we need to discuss terms. Terms? Glorbex's voice had climbed several octaves, making him sound like a particularly distressed parrot. What terms? You've destroyed my empire. Oh no, Your Magnificence. We've liberated it. There's a difference. Though I understand the distinction might be subtle from your perspective. Around the throne room, Vorthak officials huddled together like frightened school children, while their tablets displayed the continuing collapse of everything they'd once controlled. This is impossible, Kragoth whispered. You can't conquer an empire in 47 minutes. Morrison shrugged. Technically, we conquered it about 30 years ago. We just waited for you to give us an excuse to mention it. Speaking of which, thank you for that. Maya's sacrifice wasn't in vain. You knew, Glorbex realized, his voice hollow. You knew we would execute her.
We hoped you wouldn't. Maya volunteered for this mission knowing the risks, but we really genuinely hoped you'd prove us wrong about your nature. Unfortunately, you exceeded our worst expectations. Dr. Vasquez's voice joined the conversation. For what it's worth, Your Magnificence, Maya's last words were accurate. You really should have done your homework. Urine kit. A simple background check would have revealed that Maya Rodriguez was Admiral Morrison's goddaughter. The temperature in the throne room seemed to drop several degrees.
Morrison's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes suggested that politeness was becoming increasingly difficult to maintain. Here are your options, Glorbex. Option 1. You and your senior staff resign immediately and accept exile to a pleasant but heavily monitored agricultural world where you can spend your remaining years contemplating the consequences of your life choices. And option 2. There is no option 2. That was humanity being generous. The alternative is that we let the people you've been oppressing for the past century decide your fate, and I suspect they're feeling significantly less charitable than we are. Blixnorp looked up from his tablet one final time. Sir, I'm receiving surrender notifications from every remaining Vorthak installation in the galaxy. The war is over. War? Morrison raised an eyebrow. What war? This was a police action. Wars involve actual fighting. Through the throne room's massive windows, the lights of the capital city flickered and went out, then came back on in a pattern that spelled out under new management in 17 different languages.
Emperor Glorbex the Magnificent, ruler of 600 star systems and 14 billion subjects, looked around his empty throne room and realized that the most powerful empire in galactic history had just been ended by a species that most people considered upstart newcomers.
How? He whispered. Admiral Morrison's hologram began to fade as the transmission ended. Simple, Your Magnificence. You forgot the most important rule of interstellar relations. Don't mess with species that evolved from persistence hunters. We never, ever give up, and we never, ever forget. The hologram disappeared, leaving the former emperor alone with the wreckage of his ambitions and the uncomfortable realization that humanity's reputation for being patient and diplomatic had been the most terrifying threat in the galaxy. 6 months later, the former Vorthak Empire had been reorganized into something called the Terran Administrative Zone, which sounded much more boring than galactic conquest but was considerably more effective. Ambassador Priya Patel stood in what used to be Glorbex's throne room, now converted into a remarkably efficient administrative center where former slaves were learning to become civil servants and former oppressors were learning to grow vegetables. Status report, she said to her aide, a young man whose previous job title had been Revolutionary Coordinator and whose current business cards read Deputy Assistant Manager of Transitional Governance. All systems nominal. Ambassador. Crime rates are down 90%, economic productivity is up 300%, and we've had 0 requests for the restoration of the old government. And the former emperor? Still on New Harmony, sir. Latest reports indicate he's become quite good at turnip farming and has started a support group for former dictators. Attendance is surprisingly high. Priya nodded, making notes on her tablet, and through the massive windows, the city sprawled below them, bustling with the kind of productive energy that came from people who were finally free to build something worthwhile. A memorial had been erected in the city's central plaza, a simple stone with Maya Rodriguez's name and the words she tried to save people. It was enough. Humans weren't much for elaborate monuments, but they were excellent at remembering the important things. Across the galaxy, other civilizations were hastily updating their diplomatic protocols. The phrase "don't anger the humans" had become the unofficial first rule of interstellar relations, right ahead of "don't eat the diplomats." And always check if that planet has anyone living on it before you strip mine it. The Galactic Council had held 17 emergency sessions, trying to figure out how humanity had managed to dismantle the most powerful empire in known history without firing a shot in anger. The official report concluded that humans were surprisingly thorough in their contingency planning, and possibly the most patient species in the galaxy. What the report didn't mention because it was classified at levels that didn't officially exist, was that similar networks were already in place around every other major power in galactic space, not because humans were planning to conquer anyone, but because they'd learned something important about the universe. If you wanted to keep the peace, you had to be prepared for war, and if you had to fight, you might as well make it quick and decisive. Admiral Morrison, reached for comment at his retirement ceremony, had simply smiled and said, "The thing about humans is, we're really quite friendly. We want to get along with everyone. We want to trade, explore, learn, and generally have a good time. But if you hurt our people, if you threaten what we've built, if you make the mistake of thinking that kindness means weakness, well." He'd paused, looking out at the stars where human ships now patrolled trade routes that had been pirate-infested for centuries, and where former slave worlds were building their own governments, and where a little girl named Maya Rodriguez had changed the course of galactic history by refusing to back down. Well, then you learn why we're the species that conquered our own planet before we even figured out how to leave it. And that's a lesson nobody ever needs to learn twice. And the memorial in the plaza bore fresh flowers every day, left by people from a dozen different species who understood that sometimes the best way to honor a life was to make sure the sacrifice meant something. Maya Rodriguez had died at 1423:07 Galactic Standard Time. At 1510:07, the Age of Empires had ended, and across the galaxy, bullies learned to find new hobbies,